Welcome to this Daily Mirror front cover tutorial. We are going to be using Adobe Photoshop today. Here we have the template which I've provided for you, along with the guideline grids which I've created, and I've also selected rulers. So when you open the Photoshop template, you should be able to have those already in place. On the template, I've also placed the front cover along with a label. So I've labeled each part to the newspaper for you to add your own version of. So we're going to copy this one today, and then you're going to make your own version yourself. You can turn off those layers whenever you need to. So we're going to start by adding the masthead, which is top left. As you know, the masthead being the red top. We're going to turn off layer 1. We're going to go to the folder which I've created for you called Newspaper Front Cover Lesson. Double tap on Images, find the masthead, drag it to the Photoshop icon down below, and then let go of your mouse button. Now, fortunately for us, it's already the right size, so put it into position within those grid lines. If you wanted to resize it, you would pinch the corner of the image box, but in this case it's more or less exactly the right size. So when you've placed it into position, just press return on your keyboard, and that is the first stage done. So you have placed the masthead. Now the masthead is already labeled as masthead, but if you needed to rename it, you would double click and you could type the name of the layer, which I recommend you do at every stage. Now the next step in this tutorial is to create the plug in the top right. Let's just deselect that and that layer. I'm bringing it back in. I'm going to show you how to replicate this plug. Now ordinarily they put royal stories, soap stories, celeb stories or sports, but for this tutorial we're going to replicate this now. So I'm going to show you how to make a blue background square, how to mask an image, and how to set text. Now those three skills will help you build the entire cover. Okay, use the pipette tool to color pick that pale blue. Now you see the pale blue is in our foreground color. You see the inner ring is the color that's being picked, and in our foreground color it is set to that pale blue. Then what we're going to do is deselect layer 1. We are going to go to rectangular marquee tool, select the area that we want to fill in blue. That's rectangular marquee tool. We are going to make a new layer, and then we're going to rename it plug color. So to fill the foreground, you can select the paint bucket tool, which is where the gradient is, click and hold, select paint bucket tool, and there you can just click on that square once it's selected to fill that plug space with blue. Okay, what we're going to do now is insert an image and mask an image. We're going to go to our templates folder, go to the images folder, select King George VI, click and drag that to the Photoshop icon down below. You might want to view as large icons to see what you're doing. So click on King George VI, drag it down to the taskbar where the Photoshop icon is. Wait for it to open up again, release the image and place it in place. Now we need to get rid of the background, but first we're going to roughly put it into position. So I'm going to turn off the plug color, roughly get into position by resizing it. We can see that the cutoff point is just below his tie. We're going to get the head slightly bigger. You can see the head is slightly sticking out of that blue box as well. So we're going to turn off the masthead, make sure everything is nice and clear for us to see. And then I'm going to draw a box using the rectangular marquee tool. Then what you need to do is go down to the bottom right. There's a square with a circle inside called Add Layer Mask. I want you to click on that, and then essentially it's masked away the outside of that rectangle and it's created the layer mask. So it's a non-destructive way of deleting part of the image you do not want to see temporarily. So we're going to roughly get into position. I'm going to zoom in using the magnifying tool. Press spacebar, press and hold spacebar to move into position, and if you've zoomed in a bit too close, Press Control minus to zoom back out, roughly getting it into position. Hide the layer, bring it back in just to make sure it's roughly into position. I pressed V on the keyboard to move the image. So we roughly get into position, and then we're going to go ahead and delete all of the image outside of his head. So what we need to do is select Magic Wand tool. Now when you log in, it might not actually be on Magic Wand tool. What you need to do is click and hold the icon and select Magic Wand. Then you need to go and select subject. Then you need to go to select inverse. Inverse is just the fourth icon down. And using a black brush tool, I would like you to delete the outside of his head and shoulders. So that is getting rid of all of the outside, the areas that we don't need. You can make your brush bigger by pressing the brackets either side of the P on the keyboard. You press the move tool again, roughly get into position. Now we need to get rid of his shoulder now. So what we need to do is, again, resize it. And then hide it just to make sure it's in the right place. A little bit of his shoulder there is looking slightly grubby there. Bit of leftover image, so I'm getting a smaller black brush tool and rubbing out his shoulder. All the while, this is a non-destructive way of erasing it. We're just masking it. Press the rectangular marquee tool icon again. Select this part of the shoulder. And using a black brush tool, you can rub out his shoulder. And there you have it. So that's how you mask an image. And that's how you delete a background as well. Okay, let's add an image of the Queen too. First thing we need to do is go to our newspaper front cover lesson, go to the images folder, click and hold the Queen image and drag that into the Photoshop icon, release your mouse button and it will place a very large image of the Queen. So the same thing we did with King George, you're going to resize the Queen's photo, get it roughly into position. Turn back on layer 1 and then you want to bring the Queen, make sure it's on top of everything else so you can put it into position. So again, rearrange the layers there. Just roughly put into position. Get rough size and exactly the same thing as you did with King George. You are going to click on the Magic Wand icon. Go to select subject. Now it's probably going to take some time figuring out the edge of the Queen's head because the crown is quite intricate in this image. Click on layer mask. Roughly get the Queen into position. Now you need to zoom in as previously indicated. Hold down spacebar to nudge it. Press Control minus to zoom back out if you've zoomed too far in. That's pretty spot on. So once it's in position, do your final tweaks there. You can select the rectangular marquee tool and select the bottom half of the Queen. Now you don't always need to use a black brush tool. If it's a simple shape like that, you can just press Alt and backspace. If black is your foreground color and white is your background color, Alt backspace completely deletes that part for you in one button press. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to install and modify text for the plug area of the newspaper. You need to navigate your way to the templates folder, and if you go to the fonts folder, double click there, go to subheadings font. It's called Interstate Compressed Light. Double click on the icon, hit install. Now I've already installed it, so just say install when it comes up. Then what you need to do is zoom in. I like to zoom in, hold down spacebar to make sure it fills the whole screen. And what I'm going to do is switch switch it on and off to make sure I get it into position. Press T for text tool, click there, type tiers for the king. Then you're going to click and highlight the text, change the font to Interstate compressed light. There we are. We're going to resize the text to get it roughly the same height, same cap height. You can see that the leading between each is not quite right, but we're going to make some modifications to that right now. So roughly get the cap height, so the T is roughly the same height. Then what we're going to do is highlight the text and then go over to the character tab on the right. Then we're going to adjust the leading between the two lines of text. So we're going to head on over to auto, where it says auto, switch it to 60. You can nudge it and fine tune it with your arrow keys on the keyboard. So you're closing up the gap. And then what you're going to do then is adjust the tracking. So you're going to bunch the letters up slightly a bit more. So what happens is newspapers really modify their text to make sure they can fit as many letters as possible in any given space. So roughly get the beginning letters sorted. You can see my overlay is slightly off. So I'm going to select the text again, highlight the text again, and then in the character box, if you go to this window here, it will adjust the tracking. So it's set to 0. So if you get it to around about -40, it's roughly in the right position. Do the same to the second line of text. So the king, adjust the tracking to around about -40. Okay, the G is a little bit closer, but we're roughly in position there. For you to replace with your own text. So I'm going to switch between the two, and now I'm going to move it slightly out of the way to show you how to change the color of the font. So we're going to select T, we're going to highlight our text, we are going to use the pipette tool or the eyedropper tool to get that dark blue. So highlight that again, double click on the white square above and then color pick that dark blue, and then you've got exactly the same blue as is used by the Daily Mirror. Now you may have noticed that the Queen's shoulder goes above the T, so what I've done there is move the Queen's image above the text just to make sure it's in keeping. I've pressed Ctrl 0 to zoom back out, and as you can see we're slowly building up our plug there. I've just shown you how to copy it, but I would like you to create your own there. So once you know how to do these three things, you should be able to build up the rest of the newspaper. Okay, in this part of the tutorial I'm going to show you how to install and modify the Strapline text. So the grey report fallout is this one. Head on over and install Stafford medium, that's the closest font I could find. Press the text tool, click, and it will immediately create a new layer. It's called layer 3 in this instance. Change it to the newly installed Stafford medium regular. Make sure you are typing in all caps. So make sure you're typing in all caps. So grey report. Please spell check. I've spelled that incorrectly. Double click on the swatch at the top and color pick that deep red currently on there. Roughly get it into position. You might need to resize. You definitely need to tweak the tracking again. We're going to go over to the character window in a second. So roughly get into position. And there I've seen that I've spotted that I've forgotten to put the P. You do need to make sure you spell check your work. So what I'm doing is adjusting the tracking, and now I'm numerically adjusting the size of the cap height using the arrow keys on my keyboard. I'll just make sure we put the letter P in there. Roughly get into position. Highlight the text again and play around with the tracking. It's a bit too spaced out at the moment. Let's highlight that there. bring the tracking down to around about 60. And there we get that strapline effect as well. So if we turn off layer 1 again, we have just inserted a Daily Mirror style strapline. Okay, this part of the tutorial is going to show you how to insert the main image of Boris leaving number 10 Downing Street. I know at the moment we are mimicking the front cover, but I would like you to create and build your own. So head on over to the templates folder, go on to images, double click on images. Now I found this Boris image as it was taken by Getty Images. I'm going to click and drag it into the Photoshop file, and I'm going to, as I did previously, resize it, roughly get into position. Now they want to make sure his smirking face is nice and big, and then what I like to do is toggle between the original and my version just to roughly make sure it's in position. I can play around with the opacity and then press V on the keyboard as well just to make sure it's roughly in position. There we go. And then once it's in position roughly, I'll bring the opacity back up to 100. Then I'm going to zoom out. Then, as I did before, I'm going to select the main image of Boris using the rectangular marquee tool. And then making sure I select the image of Boris, I'm going to click on the Create Layer Mask. And then that leaves me with the main image of Boris. You'll notice that the original image has a concrete part of the wall behind him, so we're going to have to mask that bit out if we're going to make Boris blend into the background and make sure that your subheadings are visible. So what we need to do is go to the magic wand tool, select subject to make sure it selects all of Boris. Let's give it a chance to think there. Then what we need to do is select the layer mask, go to inverse, and then using a black brush tool, so make sure we've got black, B for brush, what we need to do is just quickly rub out that part of Boris. And then what we're going to do is, we've got a little bit of the image there, we're going to clean that up later. Add a new layer, rectangular marquee tool, fill it with black, pressing down Alt backspace, putting it behind Boris, and then we have Boris on a black background ready to insert the subheadings there. We are now going to install the headline font. That's called Zero Shame in this instance. So I would like you to head on over to the folder, install Interstate. Let's go to the headline font, install Interstate Compress Black, double click on that, hit the word install, and then select Interstate Compress Black, click the T for text tool, type the words Zero Shame in all caps, and then I would like you to resize it. And as we did earlier in the tutorial, we're going to have to adjust the tracking, and then we're going to change zero to yellow and shame to white, and then add a stroke on it as well. So I like to zoom in to make sure I can see what I'm doing, and then highlight 0, and then adjust the tracking. Once you get the tracking sorted, you realize how much smaller and bunched up it is. So as I said before, newspapers like to squeeze text in to make sure they can use as much of the space as possible and create the biggest impact. So we're going to lay the black text on top of what's already there, just to make sure we get it as close as possible. So that kind of looks like the right height. Roughly get into position. Okay, now we see the space between the 0 or the O and the S needs closing up. So what I'm going to do now is press the T tool, highlight just the space. I'm not highlighting any letters, I'm highlighting the space. And I'm going to adjust the tracking So essentially I'm going to close up that space by adjusting the tracking as I did earlier. So I'm going to change it to -100 and roughly get into position. Now we're pretty spot on, I think, so we're going to move it up. I'm going to highlight the word 0. Now, as I did before, I'm going to click on the color palette above, color pick the yellow, click OK. I'm going to do the same for shame. So highlight the word shame, double click on the black color palette above, change it to white. Now you see there's a very thin black stroke. So what we need to do is go to the layers file, double click in the gray area where it says 0 shame. Make sure I can see the word shame at the same time. Click on the tick box stroke, and then I would like you to add around about a 3 or 4 pixel thickness black stroke. Now black should be the default in this instance, so 3 or 4 works, I think. We'll go with 4, and there you have it. So make sure you install that font, and you can create a mirror style headline that looks very, very similar to the mirror set text as set by Eduqas. Okay, so by now, using the techniques that I've shown you, you should be able to build up a pretty decent front cover in the style of the Daily Mirror set text, but I'm going to show you how to do the subheadings anyway if you wish to watch it. So we're going to turn off layer 1 just to show the space that we've got. And what we need to do now is select the rectangular marquee tool, create a new layer and just fill it with white, just to give you a space for a very short mirror style article. We know the articles on the front cover tend to be nice and short, and they tend to be very image led. So I've just filled a new layer with white just to give me that space there. I'm going to zoom into the space where the subheadings are, starting with 12 parties. I'm going to press the text tool, and now it's still Interstate compressed light. So I'm going to type 12 parties. Now it's in black, so it's not showing up. Plus it's also behind layer 1, so I need to bring it above layer 1 as well. So what I like to do is roughly get the text in position, and I do that by laying it on top of the text that's already there. So I'm going to resize it. Now, as shown previously, we are probably going to have to adjust the tracking as well. So I lay it slightly below. Then I'm going to select the yellow. So change the number 12 to the yellow using the color picking tool as I showed you previously. Select the word parties, hit character, and then change the tracking to around -60. So let's roughly get that into position. Now it looks close enough, so I mean we could fine tune it all day. So now I'm going to type out now, probed, press return by cops, and comma, and 3 attended. So now you see it's not quite uniform, but what I'm going to do is type everything out and then change the numbers first, and then finish typing first. But I own that 300 pictures. Make sure your spelling's accurate. Hand it over. Don't forget the ... the ellipsis, and still. So roughly get into position. Highlight the text. Now I'm going to go over to the character window. Adjust the leading to roughly get into position. Now, as I said before, it's close enough. I'm going to adjust each line accordingly. So it looks like the tracking has been adjusted on each individual line. So just going to play around and modify that. Select the next line down. So it looks like each one is slightly modified. So this one looks around about 50-ish. You can insert those values as well. Okay, so still looking okay. remove any spelling errors. What I'm going to do now is zoom out. I'm going to highlight all of the numbers and color pick that yellow. So 3, the 1. Let's click OK on that again. And we are also going to do the same for the number 1, 300. Double click on the color palette, and then you can color pick, or you can copy and paste the hashtag number as well. But what I'm going to do is color pick the yellow instead. Okay, so now I've just realized that the headline font has switched fonts for some reason. So I'm going to go back and change it to compressed black. And there we have it. Okay, so looking at an overall view of that, it's very, very close to the set text of the Daily Mirror. What I want you to do now is, once you've understood each technique, write your own headline, create your own subheadings, create your own plug, create your own strapline in the style of the Daily Mirror.